will be sent out very shortly. Information right now is available on our website, conasarasota.org, under meetings. Here's another official, or former official, coming in, Nora Patterson. She's a former commissioner and mayor of the city of Sarasota, and commissioner and chair for the county of Sarasota. Thank you. Are there any announcements from the audience? We'll take announcements regarding your organizations and activities that you're interested in. Okay. During the meeting, we will take questions in writing on index cards, and we'll have index cards available. If you have a question that comes up while Larry is speaking, raise your hand, and somebody will bring you an index card, and when you've finished writing down what the question you want to have asked, we'll come pick it back up if you raise your hand again. Larry is the public defender for the DeSoto, which is this 12th?
I'll explain.
You want to explain all that? For DeSoto, Manatee, and Sarasota counties. Here's Larry Eger.
Good evening. I feel like this is sort of a Baptist job. I'll get over there, don't worry. Is there any reason why everyone's so spread out? Because there's not that many people here.
Yeah, we're afraid of you.
There's a few things. Yeah, well, and you have good cause to do. Thank you very much for the invitation. I got a call from Kathy asking after, I guess, I spoke at Tiger Bay, and I made a statement that aroused her curiosity. So I'm here to speak on the subject of mental illness, specifically how it impacts my office. I don't profess to be an expert in mental illness, and I'm going to break protocol in that I don't care about written cards. As a matter of fact, I have no set agenda speaking here, so I just assume at any given time, if you have a question from the floor, I would much rather enjoy a dialogue than my sitting up here lecturing on a subject, which I have no idea where the direction of this conversation is going to go. I certainly wasn't aware that it was going to be videotaped, and I'm not quite sure how I'm taking to that.
Well, that way we all know how prepared you were.
I could be great at
Many
it.
of our representatives.
Doesn't matter. It's something I was not prepared for. I think I'm more nervous about that than anything else. But having said that, there are a number of things that I wanted to go through. And now that I'm thinking about it and talking to several of you before I began this talk, out of curiosity, by a show of hands, how many people here either have I just had a personal relationship with someone, could be yourself, who suffers from mental illness? Now, are we just lucky that everybody happens to be here who has had that, or is it in fact something that affects all of us and this entire community? And I guess, because I think it is to be the latter, and what I don't understand is why it's not a conversation that we have, and why we do not address it. If it affects all of us, why do we pretend it doesn't exist? So, the other thing that I like to bring up, and that is mental illness is a disease. It is not a crime. Yet, we treat it in this society as if it is a crime. And that's where I come into play. So, I don't know if any of you know who I am or know what I do, but I'm the public defender for the 12th Judicial Circuit. There are 20 elected public defenders through the state of Florida. We each represent a judicial circuit. Mine happens to be the 12th. It comprises of Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties. Within that jurisdiction, I say approximately because it fluctuates from day to day, it seems, but I have 45 attorneys working with me, covering that. We handled approximately 27,000 cases last year, representing approximately 19,000 clients. Now again, remember, that's only criminal cases. And criminal, to be distinguished from civil, is quick civic lessons for everyone. There is one victim, and it's the same victim in every single criminal case. Who is that? Does anybody know? Who said the state? He got it right. It's not the citizens. It's the state of Florida. That's what distinguishes civil from criminal, because in criminal law you have violated the laws of the state of Florida. You have breached that social contract. And with that, you have the state of Florida who prosecutes you. And the state of Florida is represented by the state's attorney's office, the attorney that represents the state. So that's a simple distinction. Civil. Am I talking too fast?
No, I got it.
Okay.
I got it.
This is being recorded. You can always listen. You can go back and watch it. Yeah, you had an end?
Yes, I already want to know. First of all, let me tell you, I'm Reverend Terry Dean.
But do two favors. You can sit down and ask the question, because I don't want to get a microphone.
Okay. The question is, what happens once they're prosecuted and go to jail? What happens afterwards with their rehab?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
That's you're kind of taking.
If you have a question, wait for me to bring you a microphone.
All right. But that's a very good question. And let me kind of go over the background, and I'll also go over some of my frustrations with the system. As I said, I wanted to present, and I'm not quite sure how. Kathy, of course, wanted to know, do I have a PowerPoint presentation? And as the young lady here knows, I don't even know how to do Facebook. So the last thing I know how to do is prepare a PowerPoint. I am a Luddite when it comes to that. So I do want to give you a brief overview of my office as described to you. Within the criminal justice system, or within the public defender's office, my constitutional mandate is to represent those individuals who have been charged with a criminal offense, who are facing the possibility of going to jail or prison, and who cannot afford to retain legal counsel. I'm guesstimating that comprises about 85% of all criminal cases in this circuit, which is why the numbers are so high. And it is the one area of law where you are guaranteed legal representation. And that comes from a long case history, starting with Gideon and going through. And my office, I want to say, as overworked and as overburdened as we might be, provides, I think, outstanding, superior legal representation. The attorneys who work for me are extraordinary. So, within the criminal justice, we have felonies, misdemeanors, we have juvenile cases, but one area that is not criminal that we have been vested with the responsibility of representing are those who are Baker Act cases, those in which the state, the government, wants to involuntarily hospitalize because they're either a danger to themselves or other. This is not because they've committed a criminal act, but because of those two criteria. And because of their liberties being at stake, we have now included in my constitutional mandate that we represent those individuals because of the possibility that they can be involuntarily or imprisoned based upon their mental illness. In that situation, and I've got numbers scattered all over the place, so I apologize, and it would be nicer to look much smoother knowing that I'm going to be on camera now, so I'm going to look a little bit more befuddled on there. But we won't go into those numbers. I want to say it's about 2,500 cases that we have under the Baker Act proceedings, which again is Sarasota, Manatee, DeSoto County. I'm sorry?
In a year?
Yes, in a year, as opposed to, oh, no. So understanding that, how mental illness truly impacts my office, and I don't want to belabor it because I think that you have more important questions on there, but when I have a client who's been charged with a criminal offense, and again, I'm a lawyer, I am not a mental health expert or provider, but if I have difficulty in communicating with my client, and I believe that that client suffers from a mental illness, I file what is called a suggestion of incompetency. With a suggestion of incompetency, the objective is you as a defendant cannot confront the legal system if you don't have an understanding of the role of the court system, the role that your attorney plays, the role that the judge plays, what the nature of the accusation, whatever. So it's an issue of competency. Not sanity, but competency at this point. Competency to answer to the charge. Now, what's interesting about that is that once I filed a suggestion of incompetency, all proceedings halt. What that does then is throw it into another arena and whereby the judge appoints a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 3 mental health experts to evaluate my client. And again, these doctors aren't working on behalf of my client, they're working on behalf of the court, and they're actually the judge himself. And they will evaluate and they will give their opinion to the judge, because competency is not a medical threshold, it is a legal threshold. And doctors don't get to decide if you're incompetent. They can suggest that you are, but it is the judge who makes the final determination. Now, if you are deemed to be incompetent, you can't go to trial. You can't assist me in your representation. You couldn't even plead guilty if you wanted to, because in order to plead guilty, it has to be a knowing and intelligent waiver of your rights so that you can go forward. And if you're incompetent, how can you knowingly and intelligently waive those rights? So, you are sent to a facility, a hospital, for training. Competency training, which is to be distinguished from mental health treatment, because you're not being treated for your mental illness. You are being trained so that you can go back and answer to the charges. Now, let me throw it, I know that people love facts and statistics, and I wish I could give them all off the top of my head, but I can tell you that with that, we have approximately 2,500 people through the state that suggestions of incompetency were filed. Another fact, Florida ranks 49th in spending on mental health issues. We're only beaten out by, finally, I can't even be facetious, there's a camera going on. We're beaten out by Idaho. Everyone wanted to say Mississippi, but it was Idaho. So,
they don't have any people in Idaho.
Maybe.
50, mostly sheep.
Of that, the 2,500 approximately people who are, the suggestion of incompetency are filed on and found incompetent, 1/3 of our mental health budget is dedicated to training those people so they can come back to answer the charge. We spend approximately $200 to $210 million a year to train people to come back. Of those people who are sent to be trained, approximately 70% of them will come back to either plead to time served, probation, or the charge will be dismissed. So not only have they not received any treatment, but that much money has been dedicated for no purpose whatsoever. To answer your question, no follow-up whatsoever, no treatment. So from my perspective, I see a hand that almost went up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me bring the microphone, please.
See, if you sat up front, we wouldn't have to play Phil Donahue here.
What is the criterion for determining that a person has been successfully trained and is ready to go back? I mean, if they're not mentally healthy, how are they successfully trained?
Well, that has been an issue with a number of my cases. I would love to be able to anecdotally tell you about cases, but I'm prohibited from doing that because of attorney-client privilege, and I want to continue, especially since I'm being videotaped, I would like to continue practicing law. But that's a very good question, because they're trained to respond and answer. Now, again, competency is a judicial determination, and I have had on occasion where the hospital has said they're competent. They have sent them back, and we've had the hearing. And they can answer yes or no very effectively. But when you pursue and peel away the onion and you start asking questions as far as their true understanding, you can see, and I've had, on occasion, judges say, this is ridiculous. But as I said to you before, 75%, or excuse me, approximately 70% of them come back and charges are dismissed, time served, or placed on probation. Do you want to battle it and go back to the state hospital for continued treatment? So this is where we force people into making decisions based upon, because we've criminalized their behavior and criminalized mental illness, they are continued to be incarcerated. And again, instead of there being treatment, we're masking and hiding the problem, as I see it, and squandering unbelievable resources and ruining lives. One case, which I guess I can successfully conceal from you because there's no way you would know, I had a client come back who was charged with a serious crime involving firearms. And his first question to me when he came back was, if I'm still hearing voices, does that mean I'm mentally ill? And I said, I'm not a mental health provider, but I would guess that that's a pretty strong indicator. His immediate response to me was, then I'm not hearing voices. Because he was competent enough to know he wasn't going back there. He was competent enough to know that through mental health services, through the criminal justice system, he would be forever labeled and deemed some form of supervision and incarceration. He'd rather go through the criminal justice system being mentally ill as opposed to receiving, quote, treatment that was available to him. So that therein lies, you're right. And again, as I said, they come back, I have the right, once upon their return, to have them reevaluated. And I have the right to make it, and this is where the costs escalate. And this is my job, because if I don't thoroughly pursue these things, I am ineffective in my representation of that client. So you're right, I can turn my back on it and just simply say I'm not going to do anything. But that's where we get into trouble, and that's where the system is so frustrating. The other very frustrating thing, now those are felony cases. Now let's turn to misdemeanor cases. Because with misdemeanor cases, and Mr. Logan here was present when I went off at a meeting on this very subject. Misdemeanor cases, you can file a suggestion of incompetency on your client, and a misdemeanor is distinguished from a felony because a misdemeanor is a crime punishable by up to 11 months, 29 days in the county jail. So county jail is the maximum sentence you can get. A felony is distinguished from a misdemeanor because you can be sentenced all the way to the death penalty. So those are the two big areas. My arms are getting tired. Okay, so with a misdemeanor offense, you can see that your client is incompetent. You can file a suggestion of incompetency. The client can be evaluated and determined to be incompetent, and we have any number of clients walking around Sarasota right now who fit that criteria. We haven't even gone so far as to have clients deemed that they are incapable of being restored to competency. But because it's a misdemeanor offense, there is no treatment at all available to them. Now, when I was asked by the chief of police, how can we address this situation? This is where my sometimes flippant responses get me in trouble. I said, well, if you can charge them with a felony, at least we can get them processed through the system. Within a week's time, we had defendants being arrested for purchase of marijuana, which is a felony offense. And the capital that they were using in order to purchase marijuana was a bus ticket. So all of a sudden, they're charged with a felony, we've gotten them off the street. And that's one of the problems I have with how this community has addressed the issue of mental illness. That can be recorded, and I'll be more than happy to substantiate that. So, the problems are rampant. I can go, I was asked, you're not going to go into homelessness. And actually, I really don't want to go into homelessness. Although, we look at recent studies that was done in Ohio, and again, I'm jumping around for this. In Ohio study, there were 65 patients that were discharged from the state hospital. They followed those 65 patients, of which within 6 months, 21 were arrested in jail and 33 were homeless. So we know where the problem lies, and we know know that, and again, I can go into, and this is where someone far more fluent in the subject can go into, we have kicked the can down all the way to the street in downtown Sarasota. We don't address it at a federal level. We surely have not addressed it at the state level. The county and the city can't afford it, so it's on our streets instead. It was a brilliant strategy which brought together civil libertarians and fiscal conservatives in closing down the state mental institutions. It was a good idea. Unfortunately, like anything, going back to your question, there was never any follow-through. If you think you're going to save money, you still have to spend it. You can't save money and then not spend any money and think the problem will solve itself. And so, people blame everyone from Reagan to Bush to what, it started back with Kennedy. Kennedy wanted, because of the lack of humanity in our state mental hospitals. Let's make it community-based. Let's keep people close to their families. Let's utilize, in fact, with the tremendous advancements in pharmacology, we thought we could create better living through chemistry. That would solve all of our problems more effectively and cheaply. It didn't quite work that way, especially when you close the facility and you expect someone with a mental illness to follow through with their medication, because it just doesn't happen. We have a gentleman here, William Anderson, who I had a chance to talk with, and who's worked with what I think is one of the greatest solutions, grossly underfunded, but is the FACT team. And that is a community-based program, state agency, in which you assign clients to a caseworker who goes to that person's house on a regular basis to check that the rent's been paid, that there's food in the refrigerator, that they're taking their medications on a regular basis, whether there's any decompensation on it, so that the cost effectiveness is astronomical, but we don't want to pay for it. And the reality is, and again, I'm really stepping outside of my area of no expertise, and that is, but for the most part, mental illness is not cured but treated. It's not like, it's not like a cold that you get over. It's something that you deal with for the rest of your life. If I must confess, I suffer from depression. I've suffered from it my entire life. I'm likely to suffer for it for the rest of my life. But I deal with it, and it's mild by comparison. But it's not something that miraculously I'm done with it. And this is where, going to your question, and I'm jumping all over the place. Now, again, let's look at Florida State.